Hi, Alicia. Welcome to Retro Next podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on, Laura.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I always describe myself as a bookworm or a reader. I'm based in London and I always dream about having my own bookshop cafe. Right now, the main form that takes is sadly not quite a physical bookshop yet, but I have a Substack that I host called Reads with Alicia. And that's where I publish a lot of book reviews and bookish reflections as well as personal notes too.
I love this. So, what kind of books do you tend to read? I know that you read a lot of more contemporary fiction, commercial fiction. Are you looking for character-driven stories? Or are you looking for plot-driven stories? What's your go-to choice?
That's a great question. I think the way I think about what I read, it's more in terms of what I don't read. So I
Yeah,
stay away from a few genres, like horror, for example. It's not quite my cup of tea, but I generally read really broadly. So contemporary fiction is a very broad brush, obviously. It's commercial
yeah.
fiction, it's literary fiction, it's upmarket fiction, anything in between. And even though I say contemporary, I do also read historical fiction and classics as well. Alongside my diet of fiction work, I do read nonfiction, but it's
Yeah.
mainly fiction that's in my library.
Yeah. So, let's talk about nonfiction. What kind of nonfiction do you go to? Do you go to popular? So, there's memoirs, there's actually like interesting niche topics. It can be actually about other information and everything. So, which one is your genre of choice within the nonfiction? And we'll talk about back to fiction.
So my main thing for across both of them actually is that I want to learn something about the world. So even if in my nonfiction, I'm not very prescriptive about what I read. I read lots of memoirs. So one of the books that we're going to chat about today is a memoir. I do read niche fiction as well. So I've read books about like how advertising works.
Yeah.
I read lots of books about economics or finance
Yeah.
and all sorts of different things. I do want to read more like about music as well. So
Yeah.
generally a really wide variety there too.
Yeah, I love this. Sometimes it's a great place. Books that allow us to learn more beyond what we learn in school. Like it allows us to explore different cultures, experiences, ideas, or just basically topics that we just didn't think were possible. Like I read a book about groceries and how groceries are done. And it's fascinating. And I have to tell you, it was incredibly triggering too, which I was so surprised. Like a book about groceries. So I am excited to hear more about your exploration of music because there's like a wide depth of music. Like where can you go? You can go to memoirs, you can go to historical documents about music and all these different things. So I'm excited to hear that. But let's talk about Reach with Alicia. Like what led you to start the Substack?
So so if I take a step back to a few years ago, I've always read a lot, but I noticed that even though I remembered liking a book or vaguely how I felt about it, I wouldn't be able to tell anybody why, or I could only give very high level plot points, for example. So a few years ago, I decided to start doing my own personal reviews. And this was just something that I wrote on my computer. Nobody would ever see it, but I just wanted to make sure I remembered why I liked or didn't. So that's how I started getting the practice of really reflecting on what I was reading. And then a few years ago, there was this book called Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano. And I found myself telling everybody about this book. And when I say everybody, I meant my friends, my family, my colleagues. And I realized I was actually telling them the same thing over and over again, which they were very patient with. And I loved telling them all about this book like 10 times. But then I thought, if I'm going to be telling everybody about a particular book 10 times, why not just write about it? So that's really what sparked me to create a bookish newsletter.
I love this. And part of your bookish newsletter, you have build friendships with it, and you actually have friend recommendations. So talk to about how to build this bookish community you have built. Like, how do you actually make friends within the community, whether you slide on people's DM or well, what does it look like to build a community? Because sometimes we tire our friends and family talk about books and you're like, okay, we need to talk about people who actually read the books and can gosh and talk about them. So talk to us about that journey.
Yeah, I think community in the bookish world is really cool and wonderful, and it's just such a supportive place to be. Books are one thing that you can really, it can be a very solitary activity, but at the same time, if you want to lean in and make friends, as you said, it's just wonderful. So that's how you and I got to know each other, which is great.
Yeah.
There are a few different platforms. You've got like BookTok and Bookstagram and all of that. My main source of bookish community is on Substack, which is where my
Yeah.
newsletter is hosted. And I think Substack is wonderful for newcomers because there's an algorithm there, but there's not as much of a hierarchy of this person has this number of followers or subscribers, whereas I'm new and all of that. But the community is a very supportive space. So as long as you show up on Substack, like you will find
Yeah.
your people, whether it is posting your own notes or your own posts or commenting on other people's material. There are lots of ways to connect there. And the community is so open and so friendly. I've had to push myself a little bit to reach out to people, as you alluded to, DMing people as well. One of the ways
Yeah.
that I did that is on my Substack, I host something called Seasonal Reads with Friends.
Yeah.
And with that, every 3 months or so, like before a new season, I will reach out to people that I've connected with Substack and a few people that I may not have connected with as much, but I really admire their reading and the books on their
Yeah.
list. And I'll ask them, oh, what are you planning to read in the next season? So right now I'm compiling my list for spring. And that's just a way for my Substack to be not just all about me. And I do think that I do bring value by curating books a certain way, but I want to make sure that my readers have access to a wide variety of books. And it's really great having that platform to showcase more variety and diversity of thinking.
Yes, I love this. And I love the fact that you're building this little niche community within the Substack space. It's kind of I feel like Substack feels like early days of Bookstagram where there was no algorithm. People were just talking about books, your buddy reading, we're just having conversations. And I think Substack allows us to have those conversations and to really support each other and uplift each other and then find each other's reading trends. Like, I know I love this book, or I did not realize this book is great and I should pick it up. So yeah. I love this. All right, so let's talk to your book recommendations. I love the theme of leaving everything behind and just buying a bookstore or owning a bookstore or running a bookstore, whatever that's going to look like. Whether so, talk to us like what led you to decide this actual niche topic to talk about.
So the fifth genre that I call woman quits job to run a bookstore, to open a bookshop. I think in the bookish community, lots of us talk about running on bookshops or having libraries and book clubs with friends. And I think that this genre with air quotes that I've chosen today is really reflective of that. So what I call it is woman quits job to open bookshop. And that's a very literal, explicit version of that, right? And I think that is incredibly interesting. And to be clear, I call it woman just because the characters in these books happen to be women, but it could be anybody else, really. So this really exemplifies what it means to follow your dreams, right?
Yeah,
And also what I admire about these sort of books is that these are all characters, and one of them is not a fiction character, but it's actually the author because it's a memoir. Are these people really looking at their lives and realizing that they need to make a change? In these particular books, it happens to be that they decide to open a bookshop or do something adjacent to that. But really what it is here is two things. One, realizing that you need to make a change and really pursuing it. And two, tying it together with that idea of really being a bookworm and a big reader is how that relates to books and the very quiet power of book.
Yeah. So talk to us about the book recommendations. Now I want to know what I'm going to read so I can actually think about quitting my job and just becoming opening a bookstore.
Just to clarify, I hope that nobody actually quits their job off the back of this, but would so love to open a bookshop one day. The Bookshop Woman is a memoir by the author Nanako Hanada. And by the way, all three books that I'm going to be talking about today happen to be translated fiction. So with the Bookshop Woman, the author, as I said, this is nonfiction, so this is her own real life memoir. She is already a bookseller at a very popular Japanese bookshop chain. And what happens here is that she is dissatisfied with life. She's quite tired and jaded with her job as a bookseller, which I think is an interesting point as somebody who really idealizes and fantasizes this life. But she's feeling quite disenchanted with it. And what she does isn't dramatic at all. Like she doesn't move across the country or anything like that. For the matter, like for most of the book, she doesn't actually quit her job. But what she does is that she decides to join this app. It's a bit like a dating app, but it's for meeting friends. And it's called Perfect Strangers. And the premise is that you connect with a stranger online, and you meet up for a 30-minute coffee chat, tea and coffee, and that's it. Her gimmick in order to get people to want to meet with her is that she is, in her terms, sexy bookseller. So when people meet her, they'll tell her a bit about their lives, like who they are, and she will recommend them a book. And what happens through this process is that even though it starts out as a 30-minute meeting, she ends up building a really lovely community of very unlikely friends that she didn't have before. And I think that's so beautiful because it shows that we can do just one small little thing. So like a few 30-minute meetings to strangers. I mean, just be careful if you're actually meeting strangers. But you could do something that's very small and manageable like that. And she ends up instead building this wonderful new community that then allows her to really step out of her comfort zone and learn more about herself and about life. Something else that I really appreciated about this book as somebody who reviews books on Substack is that she shares why she recommends certain books to people. And it's even a list of all the sort of considerations that she has in mind. So I think this book was valuable to me on two grounds. So one, as I said, the overall message of the book, and then also the subject matter of how do we recommend books to people? How do we use them to connect with others? I think that really resonated for me as a reader as well.
Yes, I love this idea of thinking about why we recommend the things we recommend because as someone who loves to recommend books to other people, I have to be like, well, what's your taste? What do you like? What do you feel? What do you want to enjoy right now? Because it's like something to be said about love language of giving them book recommendations that are like fit to the right thing as opposed to just a generic one. It feels like a really like intention. It feels like you actually care about the other person. So I love this. I'm going to pick this nonfiction memoir. I am so excited to read it. So the next one is Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa.
Satoshi Yagisawa. So Days for the Morisaki Bookshop is actually one where the main character leaves everything behind and then starts running a bookshop, to put it very simply. It's really beautiful because the main character doesn't start out delivering books. She doesn't read them, but she's not a bookworm in the sense that you and I, or I'm guessing most of the listeners of this podcast are. But even so, and she spends time in her uncle's bookshop that's been in the family for 3 generations now. Those books slowly speak to her and they help her to heal and to open up to life as well. Something that I found really interesting about this book is how the main character, sorry, Takako, the main character, and her uncle Satoru, they're not similar at all. They're very different characters, and in many ways, they are an unlikely pair. But at the same time, it shows how important it is to try to understand each other and really give each other kindness and generosity when we are all just trying to make our way through this world.
I love Japanese cozy literature. There's something to be said about it. And there's like comfort and just a lot of them. I love the cats one. There are a lot of Japanese feature cat cafes and cats. But I'm like now like, oh, I need to just dive into the bookshop world. So all right, so let's talk about the next one, which I don't want to butcher the name, but it's Welcome to Neoman Bookshop by Wang Bo-reum.
I did recall it. Welcome to the Hyunam-Dong Bookshop by Hwang
There we
Bo-reum.
go. Yeah.
Anyway, the first 2 books we discussed were translated Japanese books. This one is a translated work of Korean fiction. And I know that
Okay.
on your podcast, you do like to talk about books that are maybe not like the most popular. This one actually
Yeah.
is quite popular, but I could not include it. It is. It,
It's okay.
it's a really beautiful book where I think this was the one that actually started my yes, this was the book that actually started my streak of woman quits job to open bookshop books. And
Yeah.
in this case, the main character actually leaves everything behind. She leaves her job behind, she leaves her old life behind, and she opens a bookshop. She doesn't do this because she's excited or she's thrilled about finally achieving her dreams. She does this because she's actually in a really bad place emotionally
Yeah.
and she's just lost and disconnected from everything, even though she did everything correct in her life, so to speak.
Yeah.
And this book I found really powerful because here is this person who doesn't have anything like nothing's lined up, like she doesn't have all of her ducks in order, but she knows that she needs to do something. And she
Yeah.
doesn't do it perfectly. When she opens up her bookshop, she just honestly spends multiple days. I don't think it's even days, it's like a long period of time, miserable in a bookshop and just like crying for hours in between
Yeah.
customers. It's not like everything's lined up, but she's still really courageous and brave to take this big step. And she knows that she's not going to do it perfectly. She knows that she's not always going to have a grin on the face, but she does it anyway. And while she does this, she's also able to really stay true to her values. As an example, she hires somebody to help out with a bookshop. And actually, he works sort of between the cafe side of it as well as the bookshop. And she could very easily, especially as a brand new business, just pay him a minimum wage. But she insists, even through all of her hard and all of her pain, she insists on paying him a good living wage, even though she herself is struggling. And I think that's a very good example of how, regardless of how difficult the time we're having, we can still uphold our values and also show generosity and kindness and treat other people fairly and well.
Yes. Oh, I love this. I love this idea of like really quitting it all behind and then trying to transform your life in some ways. And it's not perfect. Like I think there's an ideal version that's like everything's perfect. And the reality is it's far from it, but that's the joy of it. That's the part of and living your values, being able to pay a livable wage for your employees as opposed to even though it may struggle for you, it's still like actually living those values. So I really love this. And now I'm like, now I have to read this and be like, okay, now I definitely need to quit my job and open a bookshop. So, Alicia, tell us where you can find you online.
I am on Substack, so if you search Reads with Alicia, bookshop.substack.com. You will find me. I post book reviews, personal reflections, and other bookish notes. If anybody wants to join some of my collaborations, including my seasonal reads piece, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia, for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Laura, for having me.
Thanks for listening to the What to Read Next. For more book lists, cozy reads, and library tips, visit the whattoreadnextblog.com. Your next great read might be waiting there.